When I've been doing my videos, I've been getting men who are upset in the comments because of my rainbow stole. It's the longest night of the year tonight. It's the middle of winter. We need something to brighten things up. I'm going to share my sermon for the day. The readings are from Genesis chapter 21, verse 8 to 21, and then Matthew chapter 10, verse 24 to 39. Feel free to pause the video, have a read, and then come back. In recent years, we've often been hearing people saying that Christians are now being persecuted in the West. But when we hear this, we need to consider, what does persecution look like? Today's gospel reading talks about the experience of ancient Christians who were being rejected by their families and often being kicked out of their households. In the ancient church, many people experienced banishment from their households because of a split that was going on within Judaism, because Christianity began in the Jewish community. The followers of Jesus were convinced that Jesus was the Messiah, the one who's sent by God to rescue the Jewish people from their enemies. And they were also convinced that Jesus was God in human form. And they believed that even though Jesus had been executed in such an unholy and humiliating way, they believed that God had raised him from death, and so it had proved that he didn't deserve the way that he had died. But most Jewish people were not convinced, and so it eventually led to a complete split between the Christians and the Jews. And this often led to division in families and communities. People found that they were no longer welcome in their households. In these situations, ancient Jewish people would have remembered the words of Jesus, reminding them that they're now part of a new household, the household of God, and that they're learning to live in the way of God. They're learning to become like the master of the house, like God. And we hear people saying that Christians are now being persecuted in the West, but this is not what we see. People can question and challenge our faith, and we're free to respond to those challenges. We're not in danger because of our Christian faith in Australia. We're not going to get kicked out of our homes because we're Christians. There are some Christians who might experience this. I've heard from people that they've experienced this. But it's not because they're Christians, it's because they're queer and they're rejected by their Christian families. And I know that people don't agree in the church about this subject, about whether it's okay for people to be queer. I know that that's what I believe, but I know not everybody believes that. But I think that we can all agree that we shouldn't be rejecting somebody because they're queer. We shouldn't be rejecting our relatives. We shouldn't be rejecting people from the church because they're queer. There are places around the world where Christians are generally being persecuted. Sometimes people are rejected by their families because they've changed their faith. Sometimes people are in danger because of their faith. Sometimes governments have made laws against people converting because they're concerned about the disruption that happens in families and communities when people change their religion. It's good for us to have that in mind when we're interacting with people from other faiths, because we've been commissioned by Jesus to share our faith and to invite others to follow Jesus too. But does that mean that somebody has to leave their religion? Some missionaries who've gone to other countries in order to share their faith have found that some people will be moved to follow Christ and they don't leave their religion. They find a way to follow Christ within their faith, without disrupting their community, without leaving their household, and that they can continue following Jesus within the faith that they already existed in. The story from the Jewish scripture, from the Old Testament, is also about disruption in family, disruption in the household. It's a very messy situation. Abraham and Sarah, who we read a story about last week, they had not been able to have a child. And last week we heard a story about God coming and visiting them and saying, even though you're really elderly and you shouldn't be able to have children, you're going to have a child. New life is still going to come into this relationship. But before that, they'd sought to solve that problem in another way, because it was important for them to continue on their family, make sure that there's an heir, make sure that the household is going to continue. And so they'd thought that because they had slaves in the household, Sarah had said, look, my slave can be a surrogate for the child. And so Abraham and Sarah's slave, Hagar, had a child. But now Abraham and Sarah have also got a child, and things are messy. The question is, which child is going to be the favorite? Which one is going to be the heir? Which child is going to be the ancestor of a great nation? Can these boys be friends and play together? It's seeing the children playing together that gets Sarah angry. I wonder what it was about how they were playing together that got her so mad. Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert, and God says, it's okay. Do what your wife is telling you. It's okay to send them away. I find it hard hearing that from the voice of God. But Hagar and Ishmael are banished from the household and sent out into the desert on their own. But God doesn't forget them in the desert. God sees their situation and hears their suffering. God is present with them in their isolation and fear. God doesn't forget them. And they do still become ancestors of a great nation. Sometimes people have tried to say that God is on the side of Isaac and the Jewish people and against Ishmael and the Arab people based on this story. But I don't think that's what's going on. God is present in both sides of this fractured family. It could be that God is with both branches of the family and cares for both. Likewise, when our families and communities are split by faith, we might want to feel like God is on our side and not on the other side. We might feel like we want to say that God is on the side of the churches who on this day 49 years ago decided to form the Uniting Church in Australia, and that God isn't with those others who chose not to. But maybe God cares for both parts of the family and grieves when we're separated. Whatever we're going through, whatever difficult things may have happened in our families, whatever may have been lost, God is still present with us, even through the longest night.